Okay. So welcome everyone. I'm Carolyn Merrick. I'm the A program coordinator here at the center, and thank you so much for your time. We're welcome to another one of our presentations provided for educational use. And today we have with us David Sligh from Wild Virginia. Wild Virginia works to protect Virginia's wildlands and waters through advocacy, education, and influence. And they just do a lot of great work, including organizing and leading hikes and outings and events. They have a volunteer program and a lot of other things that I'm sure David will be better at talking to you about than me. So I'm going to spotlight David and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks to Carolyn and the center for having me, and thanks for you guys showing up. If you have any trouble hearing me or anything, let me know. And as I say, if you have questions, shout them out. I'm more than happy to try to deal with them, and I want to give you the information that interests you instead of just what I want to talk about, because there are lots of facets to what I want to cover, and I can't possibly cover them all anyhow. So if there are things that catch your attention, let me know. And I guess I'm going to try to share my screen here so that you can see my presentation, which will relieve you from having to look at me the whole time, which is a benefit. And there we go. So as Carolyn said, I am with Wild Virginia. I'm the conservation director there. Have been working with them since I think 2015. Time seems to go really quickly. If you don't know about Wild Virginia, it's based here in Charlottesville, but we do work statewide. It's been around for about 20 years, so way before I came here. And a lot of the focus for many years was on Forest Service projects and the way that our national forests are managed here in Virginia. If you don't know, the George Washington and Jefferson National Forests together comprise about 1.8 million acres, which is pretty astounding. It's certainly one of the biggest national forests, probably the biggest national forest in the eastern US, I believe, together. And it houses an amazing variety and richness of species, plants and animals. And it has some really unique features. And so that makes it really valuable, but it also can make it really sensitive to damages if we humans decide we know better how to make things work than nature does. Okay, I'm trying to go forward and it's not working right now.
So if you try clicking instead.
Okay, let's try. There we go. Okay, thanks.
Sure.
So yeah, since I'm going to talk quite a bit about the pipelines, I thought I'd start with kind of how we got involved there. We did jump in 2014 when these two huge natural gas pipelines were first announced or proposed, and have been really deeply involved ever since, along with lots of other folks, including Doug Wellman, whom I see there, who has been a great ally. And I mean, it ranges everywhere from the most localized groups and individuals out there all the way to national groups, all of whom have been playing just, I think, vital roles in these fights. But in general, Wild Virginia, our campaigns, we broke them into three pieces. One is water quality and energy. Obviously, pipelines are part of that. And while we look at all aspects of things like the pipelines, the water quality angle of it, the concerns for water quality impact are one of the things that we put highest on our priority list. We also look at connectivity of ecosystems, which basically means that we have all this nature out here that gets divided up by our roads and our neighborhoods and our developments. And therefore, the natural features get chopped up and can't, species can't move the way they should. And it limits the ability of our natural systems to be sustainable. Of course, the most obvious problem with connectivity is when you see the deer in front of your headlights at night, or all the animals that get killed on the highway. That's because they're trying to move within what they think is their natural boundaries, and we've chopped it up. So that's one part of it. But of course, there are just straight ecological concerns with connectivity. And my colleague, Misty Bowes, who's executive director of Wild Virginia, is actually going to do one of these webinars, I think October 29th.
Yes.
Yeah, so you'll get to hear a lot about that. She's done great work in that area. And then finally, outings and education. We've always felt that getting people outside, whether it's a hike or just a gentle nature walk, we've done such a variety of things. I went on a bat walk. That was one of the first things I did with Wild Virginia. And we went out at night and we tried to find bats. And, there's such a variety of things you can do. And we try to find things that are appealing to all kinds of people. So you don't have to be a hardcore hiker, although we have hardcore hikes, but you can do other things. And so we think that program is important for two reasons. First of all, if you know the natural areas, you're going to value them more, and you're going to be more, I think, motivated to try to protect them. And you can just learn an awful lot. You can learn more being out there sometimes for an hour or two than listening to me ramble on for half the day, probably. So those are important. Now, it's obviously right now, outings are hard with the pandemic situation. And so we're not running any in-person outings at this time. Of course, we're hoping we'll get to restart that. But we've always had other kinds of events. And so we've just taken all of that online pretty hardcore. We have had a book club for a couple years, several years, and we're still having that online. And in fact, one of the things we were talking earlier is how this online world makes it possible for us to bring in people from all over the place. And one of our speakers, I believe in October, is going to be one of my favorite authors, a woman named Janice Ray, who is, she's from Georgia, and she's an award-winning, author who, because of the situation we have right now, we can get her. We probably wouldn't be able to get her to travel up here, but she was happy to get on Zoom or whatever we use. And so, we're having some exciting things. We also had an online film festival back in June, and we're going to do an even more elaborate one in December. So I'm trying to give you all these things to make you excited about following us. A little bit about me, just so you know what you're dealing with. I started as a scientist, got an environmental science degree, and worked for the state, what is now the Department of Environmental Quality, for a big chunk of my career, doing field work and studying streams and reservoirs, and then working in the regulatory side of things. So I kind of know what the rules are and how they're supposed to work. And so maybe that makes me an even harder critic when I don't think they work well. And you'll see that I can be a pretty hard critic. But after having been in that situation for quite some time, I decided to go to law school so that I could try to then affect the way decisions are made, to make sure that the science and the law work together and that they're applied honestly. And since then, I've worked for a variety of groups. I worked for a group called American Rivers and led their whole effort in the Southeast United States. I was Upper James River Keeper. So I've done all kinds of things, and I'm very happy that I landed at Wild Virginia. And I just like to talk about how we approach, subjects. We really think it's important to bring good science to really get the facts and to dig out, the sound kind of reasoning for what we advocate. There's a lot of things that we might like to see, but if we can't explain why they're the right choices, both scientifically and legally, we don't necessarily make those arguments. So we want them to be grounded in good facts and good law. We are more than happy to be advocates, to go to the agencies and file the comments and make the demands that we think are important. And if that doesn't work, to end up in court and to make the arguments there. But at the same time, we want folks, all of you, all the people who should have a role in how their government works and how their environment is protected, we want them to play the roles that they would like to play. If you're a landowner or a resident in an area, or you drink water, which most of you probably do, all these things make you have a real interest in how these systems work and how our resources are managed. So you have a right to have a voice. And what we can do in many cases is help you understand what that role can be. I know it's pretty daunting to be told, hey, this agency is taking comments on this issue, and you look at the 100 pages of explanation of what's going on, and if it's not your usual business, then it's pretty hard to decipher. And I often have people come to me and say, you're telling us we can make comments on this thing, but we're not scientists, we're not lawyers, we don't know how to do that. We don't have anything to say. Well, you do have something to say, and because you have local knowledge and you have your own values and your own interests, and those are legally protectable. What we can do is we can help you understand the process. We can help you know when you got to get those comments in and where to send them and what format they might need to be in. But we can also help you understand, kind of translate. I tell people I translate between law and science and human. And those three realms don't always talk to each other very well. But whatever you care about in your environment is important and protectable. And of course, we work hard to bring in and to work with other groups, local, state, federal, or national. So into the pipelines a little bit. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline and Mountain Valley Pipeline, probably a lot of you have heard in the news about these projects, some more than others. The Atlantic Coast Pipeline, both of them are some of the biggest natural gas pipelines that they make. And they were both proposed to bring fracked gas from the northern West Virginia fields down into, and in one case through, Virginia. They're 42-inch pipes most of the way, which is pretty darn big if you stand next to one of them or you see one of them out there on the mountainside. And they both face the same kind of difficulties as far as the terrain and the natural features that they were going to have to deal with. And I've said many times, and I really believe this, that there may be some worse, but I can't think of a worse place to try to run a huge natural gas pipeline. It was not a wise choice. And then, of course, there are thousands of streams and wetlands and all kinds of other resources that are at risk. So this map, you'll see the pink line was the proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline route, and then the red is the Mountain Valley. Total, the Mountain Valley pipeline is about a 300-mile path, and the ACP was about 600. So to build something like this, of this magnitude, that would affect so many places, so many areas and natural resources, there's a whole bunch of government agencies who are supposed to have a say in this, and are supposed to do certain jobs. And I won't run through them all here, but you know, everybody knows that the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife Service and Park Service, they're supposed to be protecting what we own. They just manage these places on our behalf. And so it's really important that we have them out there working for the general public instead of specific interests that want to do one thing or another. The Virginia State Water Control Board and Air Pollution Control Board, since I was a state regulator, obviously I had very specific interest in how they worked. And then state agencies in West Virginia and North Carolina have also had a role. So when this whole thing started, as I said, we try to read the science. We try to bring the facts to these cases. And what we found, and what many other people found and documented pretty thoroughly, was that the science told us that this was a really bad idea. Each of these pipelines was a really bad idea. There are many hundreds, well over 1,000 streams and wetlands that would be affected by the two of these together. And each of them would affect frankly, some of our most valuable water bodies in Western Virginia, places that are havens to brook trout that, you know, are a small, very small percentage of their historic range, where they're still hanging on. Threatened and endangered species, places that frankly are both sensitive and irreplaceable. The mountain slopes, the areas they wanted to cross, are very much prone to landslides and slips. A lot of times they have very shallow soil, or they have soils that are really prone to erosion. And then, you know, especially in the valleys, we had real concern about groundwater and people's wells and springs that are at risk. Science also told us that those species, those kinds of things that I was talking about, that they are at great risk because of the nature of the work that they want to do for these pipelines, and because of the fragile environments and species. Just cutting through these national forests and other private forests is a way of fragmenting, destroying that connectivity I was talking about in a way that's really damaging. And some people might ask, well, okay, I'm going to cut some trees through a forest. What's the big deal? Well, first of all, you're dividing one piece of the forest from another, but you're also changing the environment in a way that probably can never be restored. Some people think after they build a pipeline, they can come back and just plant all the trees again, and it'll look the same way it did, you know, to begin with after a number of years. Well, that can't happen. First of all, you can't plant big trees over a big pipeline because it's a danger. And so we have seen pipelines that were built 7, 8, 10, 12 years ago where the land still slides, where there's still damage being seen, you know, every year. And then finally, because of this kind of situation, there is a real threat to humans and to property. And I'm going to show you an example of how that has played out in one place. But we have seen in the last 3 or 4 years a number of major explosions of natural gas pipelines, a couple of them in our region that were at least initially, and I think in reality attributed to being in steep slopes with landslides. So, I think some people have said, well, you're being sensationalistic. You're trying to, be extreme in talking about explosions. Well, no, the simple fact is that's not true. I don't say it's going to happen everywhere, but the threat is there. And in one of those explosions that did happen in the last couple of years, that pipeline was brand new. It had been put into service within a month or two before the explosion occurred.
Hey there, David. We do have a question.
Yes.
This is from Wynn. What funds and oversight are in place or will be in place to repair the tremendous amount of damage which was done by the pipeline right of way before it was stopped?
Okay, so when you say before it was stopped, I'm assuming you mean the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is the one that's totally stopped. And that's a big question. I won't tell you that I have a definitive answer on that one. In some cases, the landowners, the agreements that were made between landowners and the company for easements is going to help to decide what they have to do to restore that land. That's one of the things that in the months and years going forward, we're going to have to help people try to figure out as landowners what their rights are, and on behalf of all of us, what the Forest Service is going to demand, how they're going to make sure that things get restored. So I can't give you a great answer on that one. That's one of those things we're going to have to be working on and figuring out and influencing the outcome.
Hi, this is Wynn. What I
Yes.
was next curious about was if that is not in place, then what can we do to mount a petition, a write-in to our various congressmen, state, and of course national, to move this? And of course that will improve greatly after what I hope will be a change in administration.
Right.
So I just, excuse me for interrupting. I just want to say that the center doesn't involve themselves in, politics or whatever. So we want to just keep the conversation very rational and non finger pointing. I hope you know what I'm trying to say there. But I think your question is valid, and I hope, David, you answered that.
Excuse me.
Well, no, we're the same. We don't get into partisan politics, but the people in Congress, the people in the White House, whoever that happens to be at the time, can have a big influence. I will say that Senators Kaine and Warner from Virginia have been very active at trying to say these processes need to be fair. People's interests need to be respected. And so again, I won't say that I know a specific, there's no bill specifically right now that I know that you could comment on, but it would be good to let those folks know for sure that this is something you're concerned about and you want to make sure they're paying attention to it. And then the final thing I'll say is just as we and other groups figure this out more as we go forward, if there's opportunity to do those kinds of contacts or comments, we'll certainly let you know.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Wynn?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I can certainly write to my senators, Kaine and Warner, who I actually know individually and personally, as well as the governor. But a unilateral letter is generally less powerful than when you have a mounted effort by a recognized environmental organization.
Right. Well, I agree with you. And, again, we're more than happy to help push those kinds of things, but we like to know what we're asking for specifically before we try to mount that. And frankly, right now, we're still trying to figure out how to approach it.
Got it. So you have no idea, excuse me, I'm sorry, David. So you have no idea, even remotely, what it would cost. It's going to be it's going to be well into 9 figures, I would think.
Yeah, and again, that depends on what you're going to make them do, what level of restoration they might have to do. I will tell you that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, my understanding from people who have dealt with them, in past pipeline issues, first of all, you got to realize there aren't many of these cases where a huge pipeline like this throws in the towel. So in some ways, we're in, untraveled territory. But we do not believe that FERC is likely to be zealous in pushing for restoration of the environment, because they're not zealous in preserving it. And so that's a concern. But we'll keep you apprised. If we find out more, we'll definitely try to motivate people to know what to say and where to send it.
Thank you, and I would certainly be personally willing to do the scut work to get that rolling.
Okay.
So
Well,
you have a volunteer here.
okay.
I helped in 1976, which gives my age away to a point, stop a major hundreds of $1 million oil refinery at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay.
Good for you.
And it was much like what was done here with the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
And we just wore them out finally.
Yeah.
And they went somewhere else and polluted, but not our beloved bay. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I have made that volunteering effort, so you give me some idea what to do and how to do it, and I'll get my butt working. Thank you.
All right. Sure.
All right, and David, we have another question.
Yes.
Let's see. I got to scroll down. Excuse me. It's in two parts. This is Tom. So Tom, if you feel like you want to chime in, please do. It says, what are the alternatives to pipelines and their feasibility? For example, high pressure gas rail cars and or trucks. And then rather than transport the gas via pipeline, has any consideration been given to the, I'm sorry, I'm not reading too well. Okay, let me start that again. Rather than transport the gas via pipeline, has any consideration been given to use the gas productively where it is produced? For example, electricity generation, plastics production, etc.
Well, as far as the first part, I am not going to boost sending natural gas by truck or rail or any other way. The concern that, or our belief, and I believe that it's pretty well backed up by the data and by the studies, is that the gas that they want to ship from northern West Virginia, that they don't need these pipelines to get it somewhere. The pipeline capacity that we already have in the eastern U.S. and coming through this area is well underused. So to the extent that people need gas, there are ways to get it there. Second, instead of asking whether, as a society, asking what's the best way to hang on to this old technology and make it continue to work, to me, the better question is, how soon can we transition away from a bad practice to something that makes more sense economically and ecologically? And so, that is what I think. I mean, first of all, that movement is happening quickly already. And the problem with building huge infrastructure projects like this is that you basically bake in the practice of using those old technologies for even longer than you would otherwise. And I'll tell you too, as far as, I mean, there are lots of aspects of this. There's how much it's needed. There's the greenhouse gas ideas. There's so many aspects. But coming from my background, what I will tell you is that what I will focus on is what you propose. These companies propose to do these pipelines. And my first question was, can it be done scientifically, soundly, and can it be done legally? And my answer from the very beginning, the first day, was no, it could not. So if we came to that realization, which I think the courts have in many cases agreed with us, then you got to figure out those other options. But anyway, I'm not dismissing the idea that you got to look at different options, but I was in the position, and I think most of us were in the position of not being able to make choices. We respond to what somebody has proposed, and to my mind, it can't be done legally or safely. And so that's why we will continue to oppose it. There was a second part, and I don't think I got to that.
Yes, rather than transport the gas via pipeline, has any consideration been given to use the gas productively where it's produced? For example, electricity generation, plastics production, etc.
Well, I would assume that the folks doing the fracking and producing the gas up there will sell it to somebody local more than they will a state or two away. And I'm sure would happily do that if there was that much use for it. The fact is that they've been producing through the last several decades, they've been producing more and more and more. And they really, to be able to keep that operation going, needed to push it out and needed to push it towards the coast and probably even internationally. So, and as far as using it to make plastics or whatever, again, I know there are people who have those kinds of projects, but the volume of gas that they are able to extract up there is just way more than I think they could ever use locally. So,
Got another question. Do you mind?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Tom, is that is there any ancillary comments or questions you had to that? If you did, just let me know.
I've actually worked on a project similar to that, to the use of the generation of power near the area where it is created. And the biggest problem we're having now is with batteries. The technology in that is rapidly advancing. In other words, we can produce a tremendous amount of power, but we don't have it when we need it. And that is something that I actually am trained in that area. I'm not an engineer, I'm an immunochemist, but it can be done, and it will be done. And in 10 years, we should have the types of batteries that can store massive amounts of electrical power at the site, and they can generate around the clock while and then have it available for major times of need for usage.
That's Wynn, just so everybody knows. Thank you, Wynn. I have another question from Doug. What about the money Dominion pledged gave to both Virginia and North Carolina in advance? Was that for restoration?
I guess you would say it was called for mitigation. So a lot of it was devoted to things like land trust and conservation easements and things like that. So it was intended to be used, whether the pipeline, even if the pipeline got built. I don't think that it's going to be transferable back to fixing places that might have been, harmed or altered by the pipeline, by the cutting. Let's just say that the ACP, they were never able, they never got approval to do active land disturbance and construction in Virginia, just so people aren't confused about that. The Mountain Valley Pipeline has done lots of that. But we were lucky in that in Virginia, they did a lot of damage by cutting lots of trees, but they were never able to go that next step, which was a real benefit to us. So I'm gonna move quickly into, as I say, I like to combine the science with the law, and it's very simple. When you got the science saying there are going to be serious problems, those agencies have a responsibility to acknowledge those problems and to make decisions that reflect that. The fact is that essentially none of these agencies that I listed earlier did that. And that's just not just my opinion. The federal courts have sided with us against the agencies over and over again. When the Forest Service made its approvals on both pipelines, the federal courts said, no, not good enough. You did not follow your own rules. You didn't pay attention to the science. In fact, in one of the cases you may have heard, the judge quoted from the Lorax by Dr. Seuss and said, we expect the Forest Service to, quote, speak for the trees have no tongues. And they said that the Forest Service had abdicated its responsibility. The Fish and Wildlife Service, they lost twice on the ACP. They lost once, they had the chance to do it over, and they didn't even make a credible attempt at fixing the problems they had caused. The Corps of Engineers lost in West Virginia, and the court said that what they tried to do would radically empower them to do basically whatever they wanted to do. So it's not overstating it to say that almost all of these agencies ignored their responsibilities and failed to do the duty that they have to us. And now we're going to get some pictures. They're not all pretty pictures, but better than all the words. If you've not seen one of these pipeline areas, the paths, it's hard to believe what they look like in some places. I've been out there on the ground, but I've also flown over them and done lots of photography and sampled streams and everything else around them. So, and I'm still sometimes astounded at what I see out there. For example, places like this. I mentioned before steep slopes and eroding soil. I don't know what the percentage of slope this is that you're looking at here, but I'll tell you that a mountain goat will have a hard time getting up there. And what we're talking about here is these huge, as I say, 42-inch tons, sections of the pipe that weigh, I don't know how many tons, being winched up or down that slope. And you have to have huge cranes to put them in the hole once you've dug the hole. It's an amazing thing, and you got to realize that no construction company would choose to build something in this kind of terrain if they had any other choice. Here's what can happen when you have these kinds of slopes and when you have places that are easily erodible and when your ground is going to slip on you. This, the photograph here, the area surrounded in blue, that's the right of way for the pipeline. And clearly they've already cleared the ground. I'm not sure whether there's pipe in place or not, but they've got it covered with this matting to keep it from eroding. But this area surrounded in green, they weren't able to keep that from sliding. It began to slide, and months later, despite all their efforts, was continuing to go down this mountainside. And the company itself had to admit that this was so bad that it was endangering the houses and the people down that slope. My understanding is that they eventually had to buy one or both of those houses because those people were put in such danger. There's another kind of danger that showed up is in at least 3 places I know on the MVP, their huge machines turned over on the mountainsides. Thank goodness nobody has been hurt or killed as far as I can tell. In one case, not only did the worker face a real danger, but they loosed some boulders that then almost hit people down at the bottom. So if you're talking about this kind of difficulty, with just doing the work and staying on the mountainside. You know, you've also got to think about keeping all that dirt in place, which they're not doing on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Again, as I say, the Appalachian or the Atlantic Coast Pipeline never got to do this heavy construction in Virginia. They did on maybe the first 20 some miles in West Virginia, and they caused their own mess there. They caused real problems. But the Mountain Valley Pipeline has caused these kinds of problems hundreds and hundreds of times throughout West Virginia and Virginia. You see in the left-hand photo, that's their fairly pitiful effort to try to stop all the soil that is eroded and coming off these sites. And it's just not working. Sometimes it's not working because they don't do what they say they would do up front. They don't meet their own plans, but sometimes their plans were never good enough to begin with. And again, we pointed all that out. We had hydrologists and soil scientists and chemists and, you know, stream experts to give them all this information, and it was ignored. I go back to some of these places where I've actually met the people who own this land. Now, this land belongs to the Angle family in Franklin County. This is their farm. This is the place they have farmed for several generations. And it lay like this, mostly bare, mostly muddy, for at least 9 months, to my personal knowledge. And down there at the bottom, you can see, so they had to stop because they were able to lay pipe right up to the stream, but they still don't have the permit from the Corps of Engineers to go under the stream or through it. So they had to stop there. So what they've created is this lake that has sat there for many, many months, and it gets bigger and smaller as the rain comes and goes. And it has bled mud into that stream down here all that time. And of course, it's also kept the Angles from being able to use their land. And it even filled in their little pond, which is no grand thing. And they wouldn't say that it is, but it's theirs and they have a right to have it protected, and it has not been. More questions?
I got 2 more. You heard my.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. What is the current status of pipeline approvals?
I'm going to get there. I'll put that one off for a couple minutes here, but I'm going to get to it.
Fair enough.
What's the other one?
The end of the ACP came suddenly and was a surprise to many.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the MVP might also come to a screeching halt anytime soon? If so, why? If not, what's it going to take to stop that project?
Okay, I'm going to get to that one in a couple minutes also.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Somebody's good at anticipating my thought. This land belongs to the Bernard family, couple really great folks. And this is their bottom land. This is their floodplain that, again, has been in crops and cattle. And again, it has sat there in mud and water for months and months. They told me that the day they put that pipe in the trench, they had rain that night and it rose up out of the trench and floated on that water and was that way for many, many months. So it looks ugly, but it's not just a matter of looking ugly. It's a matter of the fact that all that water and all the damage it caused on the land has caused their stream bank to give way. It's caused them to have their stream polluted by mud over and over on a continuous basis for many months. And what we have now, the pipe that I was referring to is back here. They have 2 little streams that come together right at the edge of their property. And the result of the pipeline's destruction is that it has basically worn away all the land in between there, except this little bitty piece. And I expect it to collapse anytime. There's another family that, because of the damage, they've lost more than 7 feet of their stream bank. They have photographs where, when this all started, their fence was 7 or 8 feet back from the edge, and they showed me the photo the day that the fence fell into the river. So that's the kind of drastic problem that has been created. Now we get to the questions. First of all, you are right. July 5th, 2020 is the day that ACP's demise was announced. It was a thunderbolt to probably most everybody, certainly to me. And as I said, by that time, thank goodness they had not caused nearly the destruction and the problems in Virginia that they could have. Now, there was another part of that question, and I forget what that was. Sorry.
Do you think the MVP might come to a halt anytime soon?
Okay. And the answer is it's much more complicated. You know, we did manage to get construction stopped there last October through a lawsuit that we joined against the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service over their Endangered Species Act permissions. So it's stopped right now. They're also missing that Forest Service approval that I mentioned earlier that they have never yet been able to obtain. We expect a comment process to start on that again here in the next month. And finally, the Corps of Engineers still has not provided them with permits to actually cross through streams. And so all of those are still hanging out there. You know, the fact that ACP suddenly died when it did, probably Doug can agree with this, is I don't know that anybody would have predicted that that happened when it happened. We all had our greatest hopes in the world that it would, but it was a shocker. So, you know, I'm certainly not willing to try to predict the same thing for MVP at any particular time. But the more that they and their investors and others see that this thing is going to keep dragging out and they're going to keep facing this opposition and keep facing these bad decisions, the better chance we have. This is, I think Wynn or somebody earlier said, you know, sometimes you have to outlast them. You have to outlive the, you know, their ability or their willingness to keep going. And I will tell you that that's one thing in these processes that the people on the citizen sides have done in an amazing degree. People who are promoting projects that the public doesn't want pretty much expect us to give up and give in after a while, because it takes an awful lot of energy and sweat and blood and tears to keep it going. And the fact that we outlasted Dominion and Duke Power, some of the biggest power companies that we have, is an amazing thing. But I will tell you that we're not giving up on MVP. They have many more hoops to jump through. While Virginia just filed a lawsuit yesterday in federal district court because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refused to give us information about their analysis of possible erosion and sedimentation to those very streams that you were just looking at. We went through the process, the Freedom of Information Act, and said, we want these records. You're going to use these to make your decision. We have a right to see them. They said no. So we took them to court yesterday. We are not leaving any stone unturned.
Other question, quick,
Yeah,
on this topic, and I think it's a great one. These photos show pipelines done badly. Are there ways to do pipelines correctly? Or is your position that all pipelines are bad and should never be done?
I won't go as far as the last statement there. what I will say is I got to go back to the circumstance, the terrain, the geographic area. I don't think there's a way to build a significant size pipeline. It's certainly not one as big as these through these mountains in a safe way. And I mean safe for people and the environment. I just don't think it's doable. Um, and again, I think they are proving us right in that opinion. Um, it is possible to dig a trench and lay a pipeline across flat ground, um, and and I think not cause catastrophes for wildlife or whatever. Anytime you gotta dig or blast or bore through a stream, you're going to cause some damage. And so to the extent that you do less of that, you're going to have less damage. Um, but one thing that a lot of folks would say is that we're radicals and we don't think there should ever be any pipeline anywhere, anytime. Well, no, we know that there are many thousands of miles of pipeline out there, and nobody's saying we got to go take them all out. But I'll just go back to my original thing: is if you can do it legally, following the science, go to it. But they cannot do these legally. That's my firm belief and assertion. So again, I talked about all those agencies that I believed failed us in a lot of ways. And one of those was the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality in its look at the water quality aspects of both of these projects. Simple fact is that we have in Virginia what are called water quality standards that are supposed to protect us. They say you can't cause X amount of pollution in a stream. You can't cause changes to a stream that endanger the aquatic life. You can't cause them to be choked with mud, for example. And we said those standards will not be upheld. They will not be met by these pipelines. And again, we've been proven that that was right. Now, the reason that there's some kind of detailed reasons or explanations as to how the DEQ applies its own standards that are way too deep for me to try to get into here, because you'd go to sleep if I tried. But what we're doing through what we've now called a campaign for Virginia's water future is that we're taking our expertise and that of other allies of ours. We're picking out those pieces of their procedures and their regulations that did not work this time, and we're set on fixing them. We're going to be going to the State Water Control Board, which is the citizen body that has ultimate regulatory authority. And we're going to say, we need to do A, B, C, and D. And so we're building that campaign right now. We're going to be announcing it piece by piece as we go. And we're going to be calling on all you guys to help us. We're going to tell you what we think is important and where we think the pressure needs to be applied. But the fact is that we have a great opportunity here, because we now have thousands of people across Virginia who got involved in these pipelines, and they saw, hey, that thing didn't seem to work. They didn't seem, when they made this decision about these water impacts, they didn't seem to do what they were supposed to. And so we're going to take advantage of that. We can celebrate the end of ACP. We can continue to fight MVP, but what we have to do is look forward and say, this can't happen again. We don't need to be always just reacting to bad decisions. We got to head them off. So as I say, we're leading this effort. We have great partners, many of the same ones who have worked with us on the pipelines, and we're going to continue to roll this out. One way to start to see what we're doing here, a better description, is the link for this blog, which I think is in your chat box there. So if you click on that, it'll take you or open up that blog. That'll give you a little bit of an explanation. There is another link there that goes to a Facebook page. That Facebook page is for a group called Artivism Virginia. It's a bunch of great folks, musicians and artists who are activists. And what they've done is they've offered to team up with us for their September show, which is going to be their creativity combined with our information and our advocacy. And it's going to be a great way for you to learn about what we want to do and how you can be part of it. And that's the end of what I had. And any more questions, I'll stay here as long as you can stand to hear me talk.
Thank you, David. Just real quickly, do you mind, well, you can leave that up or stop share and then we can see everybody. It's up to you.
No, I would like,
okay.
I would like to see everybody.
There you go. Okay. All right. All right. I see Wynn. You go ahead.
Yes, David,
Yes.
I thank you for an outstanding presentation, and thank you, Carolyn, for letting me ask this many questions. Well, that's just the way my mind works. When we were, I keep going back to fighting the third largest refining company in the world. It wanted to go into the mouth of the richest marine estuary in the world.
Yeah.
And they also had a tremendously bad record for pollution. The way we finally won this was by getting in touch first with John Denver, who brought regional attention to it through the states, and then Jacques Cousteau, who actually came over and had his huge ship go all the way from Monte Carlo and tour the Chesapeake Bay for about a year.
Yeah.
And with the imprimatur of those two individuals, and you just talked about artists, but I'm talking about world figures. And I don't know the span of the influence of the various musical groups that you were talking about, but bringing on people like that. When we got it on the 6:30 news, I won't say anything disparaging, but let's say we're getting very encouraged. And also we were running out of money. We had spent about $30 million. This was in the early 1970s. And the refining company wanted that place so much. They'd spent over $100 million. So we couldn't outspend them. And we had marvelous lawyers like you, and we had marvelous scientists. And I, of course, did research into it myself. That was just a little tiny part from a relatively young immunochemist who was interested in estuarial biology. And so has there been thought put to bringing larger names, figures, just because of their imprimatur? Just those pictures. Good grief.
Well,
excuse me, I'll mute now.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, when we'd be glad to get anybody you can have come along. Now, one of the one of the things that brought big names was the compressor station that was going to be part of the ACP.
Yes.
Which brought Al Gore and Reverend Barber and others. And then we had, like a sign-on letter for that one that brought dozens of celebrities and other folks. But, if you can sign up any more famous people to help us fight the end of the MVP here, we're more than happy to have them. I'll assure you that people are always thinking about how we can find somebody else to bring attention to these things. I have to say that even in many cases, without the bigger names, the exposure that we've gotten is pretty astounding.
I know you have.
And I think that one of the things that encourages me even more is that the energy reporters, the people whom energy companies and investors listen to, come to us more and more. I was just interviewed by one of those outlets the other day, and I can't even see the story that he writes because it's just for investors. But by him talking to me and getting my viewpoint, you can be assured that they're not going to get encouragement from the story that I'm telling. And that's a great thing, because that's an audience that needs to understand that we're not going away and that we do think we can still win. So
Thank you very much. I am
Doug, I see.
involved.
Oh, sorry.
I
I just
am
want.
involved actually with many nationally and internationally known musicians, but I think Al Gore would be the first place I would go back to ask him who he
So,
knew. I'll be
okay.
quiet and try to be quiet from now on. Thank you so much. And remember my phone number if you need somebody to really dig into the weeds.
okay.
Thank you. Doug, did you want to share something?
I just had a question for Dave. How legitimate is the claim that DEQ is understaffed and underfunded as an excuse for their behavior?
It's true, but it's no excuse. Sometimes they spend a lot. First of all, again, I sympathize. I worked there. I know that, and during the last 20 years, they've been given more duties and less people to do it. So that's real. But the fact is that sometimes they spend more energy explaining doing it wrong than they would doing it right. What they don't want to face is the pressure from their bosses and from powerful people if they make hard decisions. Mm-hmm. And that's what's hard for them. There's no question about it. That's why we have to push as hard as we can from this side to give them. And when they make a good decision, I mean, I can be pretty hard on them, but when they make a good decision, I say so. They filed comments on the FERC reviews of both of these pipelines. And the day I saw those comments, I sent David Paler, the DEQ director, a note and said, great work. And I've said it publicly many times. The problem is they didn't follow through and make their decision reflect the problems that they had already found. So yeah, it's true, but hey, we're short on manpower too.
Yeah.
There's two of us at Wild Virginia, and we get a lot done. So I don't take excuses very easily.
You guys do a great job.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I see Dorothy trying to talk.
Oh, hey, Dorothy, let me unmute you. Hold on a minute. Oh, give me a second. I'm going to ask to unmute. Did that help you? There you go.
Take up your time. I'd like to hear a little bit more about Wild Virginia. How is this supported? What area does it cover?
Okay. Well,
and
again,
just excuse me, just 1 second. I just want all of you to know. I know it's it's a little after 4. As David said, I am also willing to stay. But if you are feeling like polite and you know, it's fine if you go. But please stay if you want to. Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Before I answer the question, the one thing I wanted to say is that, first of all, you can always keep up with what we're doing by, you know, getting on our email distribution list, by becoming a Wild Virginia member. To the extent you want to share your contact information somehow through Carolyn, I don't know how that works usually, but I would be very happy to have your contact information. And of course, I'm pretty easy to find. So, but as to how Wild Virginia, we have a variety of sources. We get funds from foundations and things like that, but the majority of our money comes from individuals who give us donations and memberships. We have a lot of very, very generous people, you know, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. It's not like we have lots of big high rollers, but we have a lot of generous people who give whatever they can. So that's important to us. And you know, we have events where we raise money, but again, it's folks who see that there's some value to what we do and that we're trying to work for them who make us go, and we appreciate that. We do work all over the state. Again, we're based in Charlottesville, and we have had the heaviest interest or the heaviest involvement in the mountainous areas with the national forest, but we've certainly moved way beyond that, both because it made sense with the pipeline fights and because the water issues and the connectivity issues, they're not confined to any one part of the state. So we try to be wild Virginia in the largest sense.
Great. It sounds like you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. We're trying.
And your website is just wildvirginia.org, which I put in the chat as well.
And I got it.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Very informative.
Well, great. Like I say, check our website out. If you're not a wild Virginian, you need to be.
Thank you.
I see
Thank
some
you,
waves.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Are we ending?
If you'd like.
Unless you have something else you want to ask.
Sure.
David, I'm a native. I'm a native. I was born at the University Hospital 74 years ago.
Okay.
Very proud of that. And I retired from the home building business.
Okay.
Worked very closely with Dominion Power, and but very retired now. I am struck because some of the same messages that I'm hearing now, when I was younger, I heard the same thing about Lake Anna and the nuclear plant. I have actually had the pleasure of touring that plant twice. I wonder where our electric bills would be today if that plant had not come online and we had coal or oil or whatever. And so I transpose that to this pipeline. The one thing that I don't know is that 42-inch line was distributing gas where, and who were the ultimate users if it had ever happened.
Right.
I mean, we're Virginians. I know you could tap into it, but since so many municipalities have gas now from different directions, where would that gas have actually ended up?
Well, actually, there was no ability for any community until you got way down to Tidewater area to have any tap to it. There was not supposed to be any provision for that. Now there was, if you saw that map, there was a branch that went off towards the coast down there in Tidewater, and then the main part went on way down into North Carolina. As far as the ultimate, first of all, they had to tell FERC, we have these prospective customers, because that's what FERC would accept as far as their needs analysis. One of the problems we had with what they gave them was that almost all of those prospective customers were also subsidiaries or partners or somehow basically part of the same business structure as Dominion and Duke. So to us, that was not kind of an arm's length justification. The other thing is that it came out probably a year or more after these things were proposed that Dominion executives were telling people, we always intended to go all the way to South Carolina or beyond. This is just the first step. We frankly, I mean, I won't claim to you that I know where it would have all ended up. There's no reason to assume that if it was a good market decision, that they wouldn't have connected with one of the ports and sent it overseas. That's, which is not an evil thing to do, but it's not part of what the plan was based on. And so, we have their story as to where they said it would end up, but that story changed through time.
So what is going to happen, or maybe they've not let you know, what's going to happen to the right-of-ways? And this is the first time I've realized by what you just said that the state of Virginia alone would have been paying environmentally the price for the line, but we would not have had the benefits. Is that a simple statement? I mean, is that
The,
what
the,
you're
va-
saying?
the vast majority of the communities in Virginia, like I say, there may have been some beneficiaries way down there in the southeast corner. But yeah, in general, we wouldn't have reaped that benefit. The right-of-way question, again, in part, that goes back to how did they obtain that easement and what are they going to do with it? I mean, landowners who had either settled or who had been forced through eminent domain to sell an easement, Dominion has said, we're not going to try to get that money back, which is good. But what is going to happen, now? Are those people going to be able to use that property as they wish or not? We don't know. And I think in some cases that's going to be part of a negotiation and maybe sometimes a fight between those landowners and the company. When it's private land, there's not much role for a group like ours to be trying to jump in the middle of that. Of course, as I said, some of it's federal land, some of it's our land, and we will try to have a say in how that works. But there's as many questions about that as there are answers, I would say.
Lots of thumbs up here.
Okay.
In diving, that means we're servicing. I think here it means, okay, good job.
Well, thanks everybody.
All right. Thank you all.
Really
Thank you all. Great questions, great discourse. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.